In a world where hope intertwines with despair, Dorothy, a compassionate doctor, finds herself at the lowest point in her life, losing her job after a patient's unexpected death. Yet what begins as a tragic day leads her to an unimaginable discovery at the grave of her former patient, Scott Reynolds. As she unravels the mystery behind the moaning sounds from the earth and uncovers a man buried alive, Dorothy embarks on a journey filled with shocking truths, old friendships rekindled, and the unexpected joys of newfound family bonds. Through twists and turns, the story shifts from sorrow to suspense, then to heartfelt connections that redefine the meaning of family and redemption. Dorothy's courage and kindness not only restore her professional reputation but also lead to a heartwarming adoption, a miracle reunion, and the triumph of love over adversity. As the tale comes full circle, Dorothy finds herself not just with a new son, but also standing beside the man she loves, now revealed to be the heir of a wealthy tycoon, a destiny no one could have predicted. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. But how could this have happened, Mr.? Warren Dorothy's voice cracked with desperation, her words almost inaudible as she fought back a torrent of tears. I followed every single protocol with unwavering precision, and the medication I administered was beyond reproach. It was rigorously tested and deemed completely safe. Everything is meticulously documented and can be scrutinized for verification, she insisted, her eyes pleading for understanding. The chief physician, his face marked by a deep and implacable sorrow, shook his head in disbelief. I am at a loss to understand how you managed the treatment, but the stark reality of the results cannot be ignored. Prepare yourself for the worst and expect the police to arrive soon to take your statements. Be cautious with your words. Speak carefully and avoid unnecessary details that could complicate matters further. For now, head to the accounting department and ensure that all the paperwork is processed with absolute accuracy. With a heavy heart and a subdued nod, Dorothy turned and exited the office. In that harrowing moment, all Dorothy craved was the solace of retreating inward, to bury her face in her hands and let her grief erupt in a raw, uncontrolled flood. The weight of the day was unbearable. It was the day of Scott Reynolds' funeral, a patient she had treated with care and dedication. Although the ceremony might have concluded by now, the passage of time did nothing to diminish the crushing reality she faced. After receiving her severance pay and a stern reprimand from the administration, Dorothy found herself drawn to the cemetery, driven by a profound sense of duty and sorrow. As a hematologist, she had been entrusted with Scott's care, dealing with his troubling blood clotting issues, only for him to pass away under circumstances still cloaked in mystery. The events had unfolded with such alarming rapidity, leaving her bewildered and desperate for answers. What had the autopsy revealed? Who bore responsibility for this tragic outcome? The blame felt almost palpable, as it was her care that had ultimately led to this somber occasion. As she hailed a taxi, her thoughts were a whirlwind of sorrow and regret. She made a brief stop to purchase a wreath of mourning, its solemn arrangement reflecting her deep sense of loss, and a bouquet of carnations, ensuring the flowers were in even numbers as a mark of respect. As she neared the cemetery, her heart sank at the sight of Scott Reynolds' grave from afar. It was positioned prominently, surrounded by a profusion of wreaths, vibrant floral tributes, and a substantial oak cross that bore a photograph of the deceased along with a plaque inscribed with his name. To her surprise, two men dressed in somber black stood by the grave, even though the funeral had likely concluded some time ago. What were they doing here, so soon after the ceremony? The answer seemed clear now, though the question had lingered in her mind. They, like her, had come to pay their respects and accompany the businessman on his final journey, each of them bound by their reasons for honoring his memory. Dorothy, her movements steeped in quiet sadness, timidly acknowledged the strangers with a small nod before gently laying the flowers on Scott Reynolds' grave. After placing the wreath beside the grave, she bowed her head in a gesture of profound respect and silent grief. The weight of the moment seemed to press heavily upon her, yet a strange sound behind her drew her attention. The couple dressed in black, who had seemed so out of place and awkward, was speaking in a language Dorothy, by a curious twist of fate, understood not perfectly, but enough to catch fragments. Her knowledge of the language, though limited, was enough to make her uneasy as she began to discern the words they were exchanging. "I wonder if this fool even knows who she's mourning," remarked the first man, clearly the elder and more authoritative figure among the pair. "How could she possibly know? Just look at her, so ordinary," the younger man responded with a mocking laugh. Dorothy felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck and face. The audacity of these men to stand here, in the solemnity of a cemetery, and mock her with such disdain was infuriating. "Everything was arranged flawlessly," the elder man continued, his tone dripping with insincerity. "I must say, it was done without a hitch," he added, his attempt at comfort laced with condescension. "Without a hitch," and a hitch, the younger man corrected him, his laughter ringing harshly in the air. Determined not to reveal her comprehension of their conversation, Dorothy bowed her head further and knelt at the grave, her heart heavy with grief. The scent of the carnations mingled with the earthy smell of damp soil, making her feel disoriented. The men's conversation trailed off as they muttered their final words and began to make their way toward the exit. As she took a step closer to the caretaker, a peculiar noise startled her. "My goodness, what is that sound?" Dorothy gasped, her body trembling. At first, the noise seemed like a mournful groan, an eerie sound that seemed out of place in the desolate cemetery. She wondered if it might be one of the grieving relatives, but the place was silent and empty. Dorothy scanned her surroundings, her eyes searching for any signs of movement or life. Then, the sound came again, unmistakably emanating from beneath the ground. "Oh my God, what is this?" Dorothy's voice quivered as she crouched down, her heart pounding. The groaning noise seemed to rise from deep within the grave itself. She hesitated for a moment, her mind struggling to grasp the impossibility of what she was hearing. The earth around the grave shifted slightly, and her fear intensified. Ignoring the loose soil that clung to her hands, Dorothy pressed her ear closer to the ground, trying to pinpoint the source of the eerie noise. It was as though the very grave was whispering secrets she was not meant to hear. The sensation was unnerving, and the sound, hauntingly clear, only deepened the mystery of what lay beneath. For a fleeting moment, Dorothy questioned whether the unsettling sound was merely a figment of her imagination, a product of her overwhelming sorrow and anxiety. But as the faint, agonizing moan pierced through the silence again, she realized it was unmistakably real. Her heart raced uncontrollably, each beat resonating with a growing sense of dread. The moan was now laden with a profound sense of suffering and despair, a cry for help that pierced through the veil of her grief. Driven by an urgent need to investigate, Dorothy sprinted towards the caretaker's guardhouse, her footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet cemetery. "Please, someone help," she pleaded, banging on the door with a frantic urgency. "I need your assistance immediately." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a slender, elderly man clad in worn-out boots and a threadbare jacket. His face, etched with years of experience and quiet resignation, looked at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What seems to be the trouble, miss?" he asked, his voice raspy and aged. "I heard a moan coming from a grave," Dorothy explained hurriedly, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and desperation. It sounded like it was coming from a fresh grave. The caretaker, though accustomed to the strange and often unsettling stories that swirled around the cemetery, was intrigued by Dorothy's urgent plea. He let out a weary sigh and agreed to accompany her. Grabbing a shovel and a flashlight, dusk was beginning to cast long shadows over the cemetery. He stepped out of the guardhouse. "Show me where you heard the sound," he said, his eyes scanning the darkening surroundings. As they walked towards Scott's grave, Dorothy couldn't shake the feeling that there was something peculiarly familiar about the caretaker's voice and demeanor. The sense of familiarity gnawed at her, but she couldn't quite place it. When they arrived at the gravesite, Dorothy pointed to the freshly disturbed earth. "Here," she said, her voice trembling. "This is where I heard the moan." Without a word, the caretaker knelt beside the grave and pressed his ear to the ground. A look of palpable fear crossed his weathered face as he immediately began to dig. Despite his advanced age, his movements were surprisingly swift and vigorous. His shovel cut into the soft soil with practiced ease. Dorothy joined in, using a smaller shovel that seemed to have been left behind by the gravediggers. The ground seemed to tremble with each scoop, and the eerie sounds from beneath continued, adding to the mounting tension. After about half an hour of intense labor, they uncovered a part of the coffin. The lacquered lid, which had been intended to provide a final layer of polish, was now visibly cracked. The caretaker examined the damage and muttered with a sad shake of his head, "It seems the funeral home deceived the family once again. They used a defective lid and covered the flaws with lacquer." The caretaker's voice, though tinged with sorrow, sparked another flicker of recognition in Dorothy's mind. Why did he seem so familiar? As he descended into the grave, carefully pushing aside the cracked lid, Dorothy's heart pounded with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Scott, is that you?" she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely a breath. Her mind raced as she peered into the dimly lit interior of the coffin, expecting to see the familiar face of her former patient. Instead, she was met with the sight of a stranger. The man lying at the bottom of the coffin was dressed in simple, worn clothing. His complexion was pale, his eyes half closed, and beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. His lips moved weakly, but the utterance was faint and indistinguishable. The scene before Dorothy was both horrifying and bewildering. The realization that the man she had thought was Scott Reynolds was someone entirely different sent a shiver down her spine. The implications of this discovery, coupled with the eerie atmosphere of the cemetery, left her grappling with an overwhelming sense of dread and confusion. What had she uncovered? And where was Scott Reynolds? The answers seemed to elude her as she stood on the precipice of a chilling revelation. The caretaker, Mr. Cobb, looked on in disbelief as the man now identified as Ethan Parks slowly sat up and scanned his surroundings with a look of profound confusion. "Oh my God, Mr. Cobb muttered, peering into the coffin. "He's alive." Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and he propped himself up on his elbows. His gaze was frantic as he tried to comprehend his situation. "Where am I?" he croaked, clutching the edges of the coffin. "Am I in a grave or already on the other side? Is this how it all happens?" Dorothy, her voice trembling with concern, quickly interjected, "We need to call an ambulance. He's in shock, and besides, this isn't Scott Reynolds." Mr. Cobb, though initially taken aback, quickly moved to assist Ethan out of the grave. The young man, still disoriented, looked around with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. "I don't understand how I got here," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just supposed to fill in for the gravediggers. I came for an interview, and then everything went blank. My head feels like it's spinning." "Who are you, Mr.?" Cobb asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he helped Ethan out of the grave. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the man replied. "Ethan Parks." Dorothy and Mr. Cobb exchanged bewildered glances. The sight of a living person in a grave meant for someone else was shocking and inexplicable. It was an absurd situation that defied logic. "How did you end up here?" Dorothy asked, her anxiety palpable. "Did you know the deceased?" "No, I didn't know him," Ethan replied, shaking his head. "I've never heard that name before. Wait, I remember now. They asked me to substitute for the gravediggers. I took the job because I needed it, and the last thing I remember was seeing a coffin on a pedestal. What is happening? I'm so confused." Dorothy's worry deepened. She looked at Mr. Cobb, who had begun to shine his flashlight around the excavation site. It was then that she had a sudden realization. "Yes, he was my high school foreign language teacher," Dorothy murmured. "Mr. Cobb, is that you?" Mr. Cobb's face broke into a smile. "Ah, you remember me at last. I recognized you right away. You haven't changed much, but I've aged a bit and, well, changed careers. I was a teacher, and now I'm the cemetery caretaker." Emotion surged in Dorothy's chest as tears welled in her eyes. Mr. Cobb had been her favorite teacher, the one who had nurtured her love for languages and helped her become one of the top students. "And I see a familiar face but couldn't remember right away," Dorothy said, feeling a pang of guilt. Mr. Cobb waved it off. "No need to worry about it. What matters now is helping Ethan. This is quite strange. I've never seen anything like it before." Meanwhile, Ethan, still visibly shaken, was pacing anxiously around the grave. Dorothy took his hand to calm him. "Don't worry, everything will be all right. We'll call for help, and we'll figure this out." Ethan looked at her with a mixture of dread and apprehension. "No, I don't want an ambulance or the police. I don't understand what's happening, and honestly, I don't want to get mixed up with law enforcement. Who knows what I've stumbled into? I'm afraid of what might come of this." Sensing Ethan's acute distress, Mr. Cobb proposed a more immediate solution. "Why don't you come to my place? I can offer you some water and a place to rest. I'll take care of recovering the grave. Whoever put you in there likely wanted things to stay hidden. We should keep everything as it was." Ethan nodded in agreement, though his eyes remained distant and lost. Mr. Cobb led him away from the grave and into the comfort of his modest quarters. Dorothy, feeling the weight of the situation, took out her camera and began documenting the scene. She photographed the grave, the cracked coffin lid, and all related details, including the cross with the photograph and plaque, and the wreaths and mourning ribbons. Afterward, she assisted Mr. Cobb in carefully filling in the grave to restore it to its original state. As they worked, Dorothy spoke softly to Mr. Cobb. "I'm sorry I haven't visited you since graduating from medical school. After high school, everyone seemed to drift apart." Mr. Cobb gave a nostalgic nod. "I often thought of you. You were one of my brightest students. I always believed you'd either be an excellent translator or a great doctor. I'm proud of what you've achieved, Dorothy." Their shared memories and the unexpected reunion offered a fleeting comfort amidst the chaos. As they finished their task, the eerie and unsettling events of the day began to sink in. The mystery of Ethan Parks and the unsettling situation at Scott Reynolds' grave loomed large, leaving them with more questions than answers as the day drew to a close. As the last rays of daylight faded, Dorothy, Mr. Cobb, and Ethan settled around a small table near the caretaker's lodge. The cemetery's somber atmosphere seemed to dissolve in the warmth of the conversation, offering a brief respite from the unsettling events of the day. Mr. Cobb began to recount a personal tragedy. His voice trembled as he shared that his only son had died in a car accident several years ago. The subsequent loss of his family home, following his daughter-in-law's harsh decision to exclude him, had left him isolated. Now, he lived in the caretaker's lodge, cut off from his grandchildren whom he yearned to see. Dorothy listened with a heavy heart, her sympathy for Mr. Cobb growing. "How could she be so cruel?" she asked. "Is your daughter-in-law really that heartless?" Mr. Cobb sighed deeply. I think she's just terrified that I might take her grandchildren away. Her fear has turned into something much darker. Dorothy's mind raced, realizing that his daughter-in-law might be acting out of insecurity and fear. You shouldn't have to be cut off from your family like this. You have every right to see your grandchildren, and it's their right to have you in their lives. You should fight for it, Mr. Cobb. I'd like to, but it's not simple, Mr. Cobb replied, his voice tinged with despair. I can't afford a good lawyer, and the ones who are affordable often exploit those in my situation. Dorothy felt a surge of determination. Don't worry, Mr. Cobb. I'll help you figure this out. I'm not sure how just yet, but I'll find a way. Mr. Cobb looked at her with gratitude. Dorothy, you're a true blessing. I don't know how to thank you enough. There's no need for thanks, Dorothy said warmly, embracing him. You've always been my favorite teacher. Helping you is an honor. The bond between them, forged in the unexpected circumstances of the day, was a powerful reminder of their shared past and mutual respect. Mr. Cobb prepared some aromatic tea for them, and the atmosphere lightened as he began sharing amusing anecdotes from his past. For a moment, the laughter and stories provided a reprieve from their troubles. Ethan, however, remained subdued, lost in thought. The confusion and pain from his unexpected grave ordeal lingered. Questions swirled in his mind. Why had he been in someone else's grave? What had happened to Scott Reynolds? Where was he? Dorothy, noticing Ethan's distress, shared details of the day's strange events, including the original phrases she had translated. Mr. Cobb listened attentively, offering praise for Dorothy's translation skills, though his expression remained troubled. The day's bizarre events weighed on him, stretching the boundaries of normalcy. As the evening wore on, Dorothy prepared to call a taxi, but a thought struck her. Ethan, do you have anywhere to stay or any place to recover? Ethan's shoulders slumped. Not really. I came here from the provinces looking for work, but I fell victim to scammers. They took my passport and threatened me. I haven't been home for 5 years. I argued with my parents before I left, so I can't go back. I was ashamed to return as a failure. Mr. Cobb shook his head. You shouldn't speak of your parents like that. They gave you life. It's important to honor them. Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting deep regret. I know. It's just hard to face them after everything. I even wanted to get married while I was in the army, but my fiancée moved on. I tried to end it all, but my friend saved me. When I returned, she had a child. I felt like a failure, so I came to the city hoping for a fresh start. Dorothy's heart went out to Ethan. The pain of unfulfilled dreams and personal setbacks was evident in his story. You're not a failure, Ethan. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, but it doesn't define who you are. Mr. Cobb and Dorothy exchanged a knowing glance. The evening had taken them from the eerie and the unsettling to a place of understanding and compassion. They had come together under strange circumstances, but the connections forged were genuine and heartfelt. As the night deepened, the three of them shared stories, sipped tea, and found solace in each other's company. The unsettling mystery of the day's events was set aside, if only for a while, as they faced the uncertainties of their lives with newfound solidarity. Dorothy chuckled softly, appreciating the taxi driver's perceptiveness. Well, you're not far off. I'm a teacher, but I deal with a lot of healthcare-related topics in my work, which might be why I give off that impression. Eric nodded, his gaze focused on the road. Teaching can be demanding too. I imagine your day has been quite draining. Dorothy sighed. You have no idea. It's been one of those days where everything seems to go wrong. But I guess everyone has their share of tough days. Eric's smile widened. Yes, we all have our struggles, but it's the little things that keep us going. like making a connection with someone who understands. Dorothy nodded thoughtfully. I guess that's true. Meeting Mr. Cobb and Ethan today made me realize how interconnected our lives are. Even in difficult situations, there's always a chance for kindness and support. Eric's eyes twinkled as he glanced at Dorothy. Absolutely. Sometimes it's the small acts of kindness that make the biggest difference. It's nice to hear that you're helping Mr. Cobb. He sounds like a good man. He is, Dorothy agreed. And I'm hoping I can make a difference in his situation. It's just a matter of finding a way. The car glided smoothly through the city streets, the quiet music providing a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Dorothy appreciated Eric's company and the way he had managed to lift her spirits despite her fatigue. You know, Dorothy, Eric said after a moment, it's not just about what we do in our jobs, but how we handle the challenges we face. Your compassion for Mr. Cobb and Ethan shows that you're not just doing your job, you're making a real impact. Dorothy smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Thank you, Eric. That means a lot to hear. I guess it's easy to get caught up in the stress and forget why we do what we do. As they approached Dorothy's destination, the city lights flickered like stars in the night. Dorothy felt a sense of calm wash over her, a reminder that even after a tough day, there's always hope and human connection to hold on to. Well, Dorothy, here we are, Eric said, pulling up to her destination. I hope you get some much-deserved rest. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. And thank you for the company and the kind words. It made a difference. Eric gave her a warm smile. Anytime. If you ever need a ride or just someone to talk to, don't hesitate to call. Dorothy nodded gratefully. I'll keep that in mind. Thanks again. As she stepped out of the taxi, Dorothy looked back at Eric. The taxi driver's genuine smile and kind demeanor had brightened her day, even amidst the challenges she faced. With a final wave, she made her way to her apartment, ready to embrace the comfort of home and the promise of a fresh start the next day. As Dorothy walked toward her modest apartment, the weight of the day's events seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a mix of contemplation and hope. The interactions with Mr. Cobb and Eric had added unexpected dimensions to her day, blending personal challenges with moments of human connection and empathy. The night air was crisp, and Dorothy felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite her exhaustion, she found solace in the kindness she had experienced, both given and received. Eric's determination to move forward despite his past and current struggles inspired her, reminding her that everyone has their battles but also the strength to overcome them. Entering her apartment, Dorothy was greeted by the familiar comfort of her personal space. The modesty of the one-bedroom unit felt like a quiet refuge compared to the luxurious space she once shared with Brian. The stark contrast served as a reminder of the changes she had endured, but it also symbolized her resilience and adaptability. She started her evening routine by drawing a hot bath, the warmth enveloping her like a comforting embrace. As she soaked, she allowed her mind to wander, reflecting on the day's encounters. The conversation with Eric had touched her deeply, and she found herself thinking about his future aspirations and the challenges he faced. She resolved to keep in touch, inspired by his strength and determination. After the bath, Dorothy settled into her bed, the soft sheets providing a stark contrast to the day's weariness. She took out Eric's business card and placed it on her bedside table, a tangible reminder of the meaningful conversation they had shared. She resolved to reach out to him, not just to offer support but to maintain the connection they had made. As she drifted off to sleep, Dorothy felt a subtle shift in her perspective. Despite the difficulties she had faced, the interactions with Mr. Cobb and Eric reminded her of the value of compassion and the impact of genuine connections. She was grateful for the encounters that had reminded her of the goodness in people and the importance of staying true to oneself. In the quiet of her apartment, Dorothy made a silent promise to herself to continue to embrace challenges with resilience and to find ways to contribute positively to the lives of others, just as she had been inspired by those she had met. Dorothy lay in bed, her thoughts swirling around the unsettling events of the past few days. Her restless night was filled with vivid dreams and troubling visions, each one pulling her deeper into a labyrinth of confusion and worry. The miscarriage, the divorce, the firing, all of it seemed to converge in her mind, creating a tangled mess of grief and regret. She had always been a compassionate person, driven by a desire to help others, but recent events had tested her resolve and her faith in the fairness of life. Her dreams were dominated by the eerie image of a cracked coffin lid and the muffled cries for help from within. This haunting vision was more than just a nightmare. It symbolized her fear of failure, her guilt over the patient who had died, and her anxiety about the mysterious events at the cemetery. Scott Reynolds, the enigmatic patient who had appeared to her in the cemetery, lingered in her thoughts. There was something about him, his wealth, his health, the secrecy surrounding him, that didn't fit the typical profile of her patients. Why had he been buried in a grave that wasn't his? And what was the significance of his disappearance? Determined to make sense of it all, Dorothy decided she needed to investigate further. Despite her exhaustion, the unanswered questions, and the sense of responsibility she felt towards Ethan and Mr. Cobb propelled her into action. She recalled Scott's face, his demeanor, and the strange circumstances surrounding his case. If there was any chance of finding out what had happened, she would need to dig deeper. She knew that the answers might be elusive, but her commitment to uncovering the truth was stronger than her fear. Dorothy resolved to visit the cemetery again, this time with a clearer purpose. She would need to talk to Mr. Cobb and Ethan, learn more about the mysterious events that had transpired, and perhaps even look into Scott Reynolds' background. If there was a connection between these incidents and the disappearance of Scott, she needed to find it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Dorothy felt a renewed sense of determination. She knew that facing her personal challenges head-on was crucial, but understanding the mystery surrounding Scott Reynolds and the cemetery was equally important. After a brief breakfast and a glance at her to-do list, Dorothy prepared herself for the day ahead. She would start by contacting Mr. Cobb and Ethan to check on their well-being, and then make her way to the cemetery. Despite the challenges she faced, Dorothy was ready to confront the unknown, driven by her unwavering sense of duty and her desire for resolution. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, Dorothy felt a glimmer of hope. The answers she sought might be just around the corner, and with each step she took, she moved closer to uncovering the truth and finding her path forward. Dorothy's confrontation with Scott Reynolds marked a turning point in her professional life. The businessman's charade was more than just an inconvenience. It was an affront to the very principles of medical ethics and patient care. Her instincts, honed over years of experience, had guided her to uncover the truth and hold Scott accountable. With Scott's discharge, the hospital could now redirect its resources and attention to patients who genuinely needed care. Dorothy felt a surge of relief, knowing that her actions had preserved the integrity of her department and prevented any further misuse of its services. In the days that followed, Dorothy threw herself back into her work with renewed vigor. She continued to support her patients with the same dedication as before, using her experience to ensure that each one received the best possible care. The ordeal with Scott had strengthened her resolve to uphold the highest standards in her profession. Her decision to report Scott wasn't without consequences. It stirred a mix of admiration and envy among her colleagues. Some praised her for her integrity and commitment to the truth, while others whispered about the risks she had taken. Nevertheless, Dorothy remained focused on her mission, providing excellent care and contributing to the betterment of her field. The case of Scott Reynolds became a topic of conversation among the hospital staff, But Dorothy managed to stay grounded. She knew that the real impact of her actions went beyond the hospital's walls. By exposing the fraud, she ensured that resources were available for those who truly needed them, reinforcing the importance of trust and transparency in healthcare. As she continued her work, Dorothy found solace in the small victories, the smiles of grateful patients, the appreciation from her colleagues, and the satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. She had faced a difficult challenge and emerged stronger, her commitment to her profession reaffirmed. Her life outside of work, though still marked by personal struggles, began to stabilize as she focused on her well-being and recovery. The stresses of her recent past began to ease, and she found comfort in the routines of her daily life. The hot baths, quiet evenings, and peaceful walks provided her with the respite she needed. In the end, Dorothy's experience with Scott Reynolds served as a reminder of the complexities of human behavior and the importance of staying true to one's values. It reaffirmed her belief in the power of perseverance and integrity, qualities that would continue to guide her both in her professional and personal life. Dorothy's dismissal and the tragic outcome of Scott Reynolds left a deep mark on her. Her sense of injustice and betrayal was compounded by the mysterious circumstances surrounding Reynolds' death. The once prominent doctor was now relegated to a janitorial role, a far cry from her former position and prestige. Despite the turmoil, Dorothy held on to her conviction that she had acted by her ethical principles. Her dismissal felt like a betrayal of her commitment to integrity and patient care. She had done what she believed was right, exposing fraud and attempting to protect genuine patients. Yet the system had turned against her, leaving her to grapple with the harsh reality of professional and personal fallout. In the early light of dawn, as she sat alone, Dorothy found a fragile solace in her steadfast values. The situation seemed bleak, but she hoped that time would bring clarity and justice. Her commitment to honesty and compassion remained unwavering, even in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, Ethan, the vagrant who had unexpectedly found refuge at the cemetery, was experiencing a different kind of awakening. The kindness of Mr. Cobb and the relative peace of his surroundings were helping him regain his strength and composure. The fog that blanketed the cemetery symbolized a fresh start for Ethan, a chance to rebuild his life away from the chaos and disillusionment of his past. As Mr. Cobb offered his morning greetings and words of encouragement, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cemetery, with its quiet and contemplative atmosphere, was becoming a place of healing and reflection for him. The mundane concerns of his previous life seemed distant, replaced by the immediate need for recovery and the promise of a new beginning. Ethan's and Dorothy's lives were on divergent paths, yet their stories were interwoven by themes of struggle, redemption, and resilience. While Dorothy faced the harsh judgment of her professional world, Ethan was finding solace in an unexpected sanctuary. Both were navigating the aftermath of their respective challenges, each seeking to find meaning and hope in their changed circumstances. Mr. Cobb watched the boy with a heavy heart as he paid his final respects. The simplicity of the child's gesture, leaving the bun on the grave and whispering his love, spoke volumes about the purity of his grief and his yearning to connect with his lost mother. The caretaker felt a pang of sadness, recognizing the depth of the boy's sorrow and his innocent effort to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. As the boy stood up and slowly walked away, Mr. Cobb approached the grave and carefully picked up the bun, placing it more securely on the gravestone. He knew the boy's mother would never taste the bread, but the act of leaving it was a testament to the boy's love and devotion. Mr. Cobb gently brushed away the remaining leaves and weeds, ensuring the grave was as tidy and respectful as it could be. The caretaker took a deep breath, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. He often found solace in his work, tending to the graves and remembering the lives of those buried there. Each grave had a story, a person who had been loved and who had left an imprint on the world. The boy's visit was a poignant reminder of the enduring bond between loved ones, even after death. Turning back towards the guardhouse, Mr. Cobb felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the solitude that often came with his job, moments like these reaffirmed his belief in the importance of his role. He was a guardian of memories, a caretaker of the past, and in that role he found a profound connection to the lives of those he remembered and honored. As he continued his rounds, Mr. Cobb couldn't help but think about the boy's family and hope that they would find comfort in their time of mourning. The cemetery was not just a resting place, it was a sanctuary for those who needed a space to grieve, remember, and find peace. For Mr. Cobb, it was a place where he could reflect on the fragility of life and the importance of compassion, even in the face of loss. As Mr. Cobb prepared breakfast, the warm, comforting smell of the sandwiches filled the guardhouse. Nicholas, sitting at the small table with Ethan, watched with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. The simple act of kindness from Mr. Cobb and Ethan brought a glimmer of hope into his young life, a stark contrast to the cold reality he had faced earlier. Ethan, noticing Nicholas's reserved demeanor, tried to engage him in light conversation to make him feel at ease. "What do you like to do, Nicholas?" he asked, his voice gentle. Nicholas hesitated for a moment before replying, "I like drawing and reading books, but I don't have many of either." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if you'd like, we can get you some drawing supplies and books. How does that sound?" Nicholas's eyes lit up at the offer, though he still seemed unsure. "That would be nice. Thank you." Mr. Cobb, overhearing the conversation, felt a surge of warmth. He was glad to see the boy's spirits lifting. Once the breakfast was ready, he set the table and encouraged Nicholas to eat. As Nicholas took a bite of his sandwich, Mr. Cobb sat down with the boy and Ethan, quietly observing their interaction. The morning news played softly in the background, providing a comforting backdrop to their small but significant moment of respite. The radio announcer's voice, though muted, was a reminder of the outside world, a world that could sometimes be harsh and unforgiving, but also capable of kindness and community. Mr. Cobb knew that this small act of kindness might not solve all of Nicholas's problems, but it was a start. It was a chance for the boy to feel cared for and to begin rebuilding some semblance of stability in his life. After breakfast, Mr. Cobb began to make plans for Nicholas's future. He knew that the boy would need more than just a temporary place to stay. He would need support and resources to help him through his difficult circumstances. Mr. Cobb resolved to contact local organizations and social services to ensure that Nicholas received the help he needed. For now, though, the guardhouse felt a bit more like a home, filled with the echoes of laughter and conversation that had been absent for some time. Mr. Cobb and Nathan were determined to provide Nicholas with a sense of security and belonging, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. As the day progressed, Mr. Cobb found solace in the company of his new guests. He could see the beginnings of a brighter future for Nicholas, one built on compassion and care. And in that, Mr. Cobb found a renewed sense of purpose and hope for his journey as well. As Eric prepared to delve into the case, he couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. His time with the detective agency had taught him that things often weren't as straightforward as they seemed, and Dorothy's story had all the hallmarks of a complex, layered mystery. He retrieved the keys to his old apartment, a place that still held memories of late-night strategy sessions and case files scattered across the floor. With a determined stride, Eric made his way to the apartment, his mind racing with possible scenarios and leads. The apartment was just as he remembered, a modest yet functional space filled with the remnants of his detective work. He began by reviewing any old case files or contact lists that might still be relevant. His partner Vincent had moved on to other pursuits, But Eric knew that the network they had built could still provide valuable insights. He reached out to former colleagues and contacts, using his connections to gather information about Scott Reynolds. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge. Scott was known for his extravagant lifestyle, but his name was frequently associated with shady deals and questionable behavior. The more Eric dug, the clearer it became that Scott had a knack for creating a facade of success while hiding a myriad of problems. Eric also took note of the discrepancies surrounding Scott's reported health issues. According to the information he uncovered, Scott had a history of legal troubles and financial debt that was only getting worse. His recent behavior, including the mysterious illness and hospitalization, was beginning to fit into a larger, troubling picture. Meanwhile, Dorothy waited anxiously for any news. She spent her days trying to keep busy, but her mind kept drifting back to Scott and the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. The relief she had felt from reaching out to Eric was tempered by the fear of what he might uncover. As Eric pieced together the clues, he discovered something startling. Scott had been involved in a high-stakes fraud case that had recently come to light. The fraudulent activities had left several people in financial ruin, and it was clear that Scott was in hiding to avoid facing the consequences. Eric's investigation revealed that Scott had indeed faked his illness to avoid confrontation and to buy time for a more permanent escape. The switch of bodies in the grave was an attempt to cover his tracks, a move that would confuse anyone trying to trace his whereabouts. With this information, Eric set out to locate Scott, knowing that the businessman would be desperate and likely attempting to flee the country. His search led him to a series of leads, including Scott's possible hideouts and contacts. As Eric closed in on Scott, he prepared to confront him and bring him to justice. The situation was tense, but Eric was driven by the desire to see the truth come to light and to vindicate Dorothy. She had acted on her convictions, and it was only right that she be exonerated. Dorothy, on the other hand, received a call from Eric one evening. His voice was filled with a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "I found Scott," he said. "He's been trying to escape, but I've got him cornered. The truth will come out, and you'll be cleared." Relief and hope washed over Dorothy as she thanked Eric for his perseverance. The weight of the situation was beginning to lift, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but with the truth on her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Eric's dedication to the case was unwavering. His old connections and Vincent's criminal contacts began to yield results. They provided crucial information that Scott Reynolds had been seen in a secluded area on the outskirts of town. The businessman, it seemed, was making last-ditch efforts to flee the country. Eric meticulously planned his next steps. He had to be cautious. Scott was likely desperate and could become unpredictable. With Vincent's help, Eric coordinated a team to surveil the location where Scott was reportedly hiding. They needed to act swiftly to apprehend him before he could escape. Meanwhile, Dorothy's involvement with Nicholas continued to deepen. She had met with social workers to discuss adoption, and her visits to Ethan and Nicholas at the cemetery became a cherished routine. The bond between Dorothy and Nicholas grew stronger with each passing day. Dorothy was determined to provide Nicholas with the stability and love he needed, and Mr. Cobb's encouragement bolstered her resolve. Dorothy's decision to adopt Nicholas had a profound impact on her. It gave her a sense of purpose and a new direction in her life. She felt a growing sense of fulfillment as she prepared for the adoption process and looked forward to creating a family with Nicholas. As Eric and Vincent closed in on Scott, the tension was palpable. Eric's contacts provided additional intelligence, confirming that Scott was planning to leave the country via a private airstrip. Eric, Vincent, and their team set up a plan to intercept Scott before he could board the plane. The day of the operation arrived. Eric and his team, equipped with surveillance gear and communication devices, positioned themselves around the airstrip. Vincent provided real-time updates, tracking Scott's movements and ensuring they were prepared for any surprises. Eric watched as Scott, looking haggard and desperate, made his way to the private jet. At the last moment, as Scott was about to board, Eric and his team moved in. The apprehension was swift and decisive. Scott was taken into custody, and Eric felt a surge of relief. The truth about Scott's fraudulent activities and his attempt to escape would now come to light. Back in town, Dorothy received the news that Scott had been captured. She was overwhelmed with gratitude for Eric's help. The resolution of the case meant that the dark cloud hanging over her was finally lifting. With Scott's capture, Dorothy felt a renewed sense of hope for her future with Nicholas. As Eric and Vincent wrapped up their work, Dorothy and Nicholas looked forward to a new chapter in their lives. Dorothy's determination to adopt Nicholas and provide him with a loving home became a reality, and the bond they shared grew stronger each day. Eric's return to his detective work, albeit briefly, had brought resolution to a complicated case. He was content knowing he had made a difference, and his friendship with Dorothy and Vincent remained a source of strength and camaraderie. In the end, the lives of Dorothy, Nicholas, and Eric intertwined in a way that created lasting connections and newfound hope. The journey had been challenging, but it had led to a brighter future for everyone involved. Exercise caution, Vincent cautioned with a stern voice. These individuals are not fond of questions that stray from the necessary. Eric nodded in acknowledgement, expressing his gratitude before making his way to meet one of them. The office he was headed to was nestled in one of the most perilous, desolate corners of the city, a place where danger lurked in every shadow. Upon arrival, Eric found himself in the presence of a businessman who sat behind a desk that exuded a sense of cold authority. The man listened to Eric with an air of detached patience, never once breaking his steely gaze. With a deliberate pause, he finally spoke. "You truly wish to uncover the fate of Scott, do you? The truth is as clear as daylight. This rogue, Scott, fled from his creditors, those to whom he owed a significant fortune. Desperate for salvation, he sought refuge from formidable individuals overseas. Left with no viable alternatives, he chose to escape to foreign lands and conceal himself. To evade relentless pursuit, he orchestrated a fake funeral." Eric's eyes narrowed in skepticism. "And that's all there is to it?" A smirk crept across the businessman's lips. "Not satisfied, I see. Very well, I'll indulge you with further details. Scott Reynolds didn't simply flee the country on a whim. His father, a wealthy magnate with substantial assets, had himself sought asylum abroad to escape ruthless competitors in the late 90s. Left with no other choice after the tragic death of his wife in a car accident, he had no means to care for his infant son. Abandoning the child in an orphanage was his only option. Remarkably, he only managed to track down his son after a quarter of a century. So he assembled a specialized team to orchestrate everything, arranging the elaborate funeral, the counterfeit coffin, and the entire charade surrounding Scott's supposed demise." Eric was taken aback, his body swaying slightly as he struggled to stay upright on his prosthesis. "Where is Scott now?" he finally asked, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and desperation. "Do you honestly believe I would divulge that information so readily?" the businessman retorted with a hint of disdain. "You don't honestly expect me to reveal his location without a second thought?" With a heavy heart, Eric sighed, his spirits crushed by the realization that this informant held no further revelations for him. "Well, thank you anyway," he muttered, turning towards the door with a sense of resignation. "Don't mention it," the businessman replied with a touch of bitterness. "But let me strongly advise you to put Scott out of your mind. Trust me, he isn't worth jeopardizing your own life." Eric trudged back home, his soul weighed down by a profound sense of disillusionment. Despite uncovering the truth about Scott's past, he had failed to locate him. That night, he reached out to Dorothy, sharing the disheartening details of his quest. Her dreams of re-entering the medical field were now nothing but dust in the wind. The pinnacle of her current prospects was a humble position at the reception desk, a far cry from the professional heights she had once aspired to. Years of grueling study and tireless internship had been for naught, all sacrificed on the altar of an elusive businessman's ruthless machinations. Scott's actions were equally infuriating. Was it too much to ask for him to have chosen a path of legality and decency? Why did his henchmen target Ethan with such brutal force? Why did they deceitfully offer him a position in the funeral team, endangering his life to the point where he could have been buried alive? The sheer absurdity of it all was dizzying. Scott Reynolds, the architect of this debacle, emerged as the ultimate beneficiary, waving a careless farewell to all and sailing off to his affluent father's haven. The mere thought of his escape filled Dorothy with a nauseating sense of injustice. Was this the price Ethan had to pay? Suffering for nothing? And who would shoulder the costs of his medical treatment should he face complications from his head injury? The harsh truth was that no one would. Ethan was a vagrant, a solitary soul abandoned by society, a person whose plight had long been disregarded. Yet, amid her overwhelming despair, the thought of little Nicholas was a flicker of light guiding her through the darkness. I cannot give up now, not when everything is at stake. I will get the documents sorted, secure guardianship, and then we will see who prevails. Dorothy murmured to herself, her voice filled with resolute determination, as if casting a spell of hope. The journey to gather all the necessary documentation and present the case in court took nearly a month. While Dorothy could have bypassed the legal struggle, Nicholas's stepfather, Lucas, adamantly refused to relinquish the boy. The day of reckoning finally arrived. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow over the papers meticulously arranged on Dorothy's desk. She rubbed her weary eyes, her face etched with a blend of anxiety and fierce determination. Today was pivotal, the day she had to fight for Nicholas, an innocent child left in the care of his stepfather after his mother's recent death. Dorothy knew Lucas all too well. He was an alcoholic, a fact she had witnessed firsthand through his frequent drunken rages and vile outbursts. She had seen him inebriated, heard his cruel shouts, and witnessed the disarray he left in his wake. The boy's fate was a dark shadow hanging over Dorothy's conscience. On one occasion, she had stumbled upon Lucas in the cemetery caretaker's hut, and the sight of Nicholas alone and vulnerable had pierced her heart. She learned that Nicholas's mother had often been ill, leaving the boy to suffer the neglect of a stepfather more interested in drowning his sorrows than caring for the child. Dorothy knew she couldn't allow Nicholas to be abandoned with such irresponsibility. In court, Lucas presented himself as a devoted father, with a facade of concern and affection. He spouted sentimental declarations of his love for Nicholas, claiming that even in his drunken states, he had never raised his voice. But Dorothy was not deceived. She had witnessed the boy's shattered toys and heard his terrified whispers in the dark. Despite the seemingly insurmountable odds and the scant evidence at her disposal, Dorothy was unwavering. She knew her chances of victory were slim, but surrender was not an option. She would fight with every ounce of strength she had left, determined to secure a future for Nicholas free from the clutches of his negligent stepfather. Dorothy recalled the poignant, surprisingly mature words Nicholas had spoken. "I want to live with Aunt Dorothy." She's kind. These words, so simple yet deeply heartfelt, had struck a chord within her. They encapsulated the hope and trust that Nicholas placed in her, and they fueled her determination. In court, Dorothy came prepared with more than just documents and medical reports about the boy's health. She brought with her a fervent desire to provide Nicholas with a stable, loving home, a stark contrast to the uncertainty and neglect he had known. She spoke eloquently about her passion for children, her dream of nurturing a happy family for Nicholas, something he had been deprived of for far too long. Dorothy's voice, laden with warmth and sincerity, conveyed her genuine intent to offer Nicholas a life filled with joy and opportunities. She painted a picture of a future where Nicholas could thrive, free from the shadows of his troubled past. Lucas, on the other hand, presented a starkly different image. His demeanor was characterized by avarice and spite. He lashed out at Dorothy, accusing her of coveting his son for her gain, claiming that guardianship would only stifle Nicholas's freedom and potential. His words were sharp, laden with bitterness, and aimed to undermine Dorothy's genuine efforts. Yet, despite his venomous attacks, none of his arguments could overshadow the authenticity and compassion that Dorothy exuded. Her eyes, filled with unwavering love and tenderness, spoke volumes about her true intentions. She wasn't merely seeking guardianship, she was committed to offering Nicholas a future brimming with hope and happiness. In the end, the judge recognized the depth of Dorothy's sincerity and the kindness she embodied. The decision was made to revoke Lucas's guardianship rights, entrusting Nicholas to Dorothy Briggs. The moment the ruling was announced, Dorothy was overwhelmed with a profound mixture of exhilaration and joy. That very day, she brought Nicholas home, transforming their space into a haven of warmth and delight. She filled the house with toys and prepared his favorite meal, macaroni and cheese with meatballs. Her home, once dimmed by adversity, now radiated brightness, warmth, and cheer. Nicholas's smile and the tender name he called her mom marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. He was finally home. He had found a place where he belonged. As tears of relief and happiness streamed down her face, Dorothy reflected on the journey that had led her to this moment. Every sacrifice and effort had been worth it. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing she had made the right choice and that her endeavors had not been in vain. In her heart, she made a solemn promise to everyone who had supported her, Eric, Ethan, and Mr. Cobb, that she would always cherish and care for Nicholas. She vowed to create a nurturing environment where he could grow up in a loving and joyful family. Nicholas quickly became a beacon of light in her life. Dorothy envisioned a future filled with shared adventures, exploring the city's wonders, building sandcastles on the beach, and immersing him in a world of fairy tales. One day, as they strolled through the park, observing children playing, Nicholas looked up at her with a hint of concern and asked, "Will you never give me back to that uncle?" Dorothy, sitting on a park bench with Nicholas nestled beside her, wrapped her arms around him and reassured him with all the love she could muster. "Never, Nicholas. You are my family now. I will always be by your side and never leave you." At that moment, Lucas's cutting words echoed in her mind. "You will never understand what it means to be a father." Dorothy was left pondering the truth behind his statement. She surmised that an alcoholic could never truly grasp the essence of parenthood, what it means to love unconditionally and sacrifice everything for a child's happiness. For Dorothy, the joy and fulfillment she derived from nurturing Nicholas were the truest forms of understanding and love. Meanwhile, Dorothy continued to stay in touch with both Eric and Ethan, whose lives were slowly but steadily improving. Ethan, for one, had taken on a new role as the caretaker of the city cemetery. He had managed to pull himself together, renew his passport, and even reconcile with his parents, who had been living in their village under the mistaken belief that their son was dead. This heartwarming reunion came about only after Mr. Cobb, due to health issues, decided to retire and made amends with his daughter-in-law, allowing him to reconnect with his grandchildren. As Ethan settled into his new responsibilities, he quickly demonstrated his exceptional skills as a manager. His dedication and determination transformed the cemetery's operations, showcasing his leadership talent. Though Dorothy's relationship with Ethan remained professional, her bond with Eric grew deeper with each passing day. With Eric's help and the compelling evidence he provided, photos showing that the coffin on Scott Reynolds' grave was empty, Dorothy was finally able to clear her name and return to her career. The department head and chief physician, under the weight of undeniable proof, publicly apologized to Dorothy, which restored her professional reputation and rekindled her hope for the future. Encouraged by Dorothy's support, Eric eagerly signed up for an experimental bionic prosthetic that promised to revolutionize the field. As a young and adventurous taxi driver, he volunteered to be one of the first to test this cutting-edge technology, ready to provide valuable feedback to its developers. Scott Reynolds, on the other hand, remained a mystery for nearly 6 months. His sudden and unexpected return to his homeland was marked by dramatic flair. Scott reappeared not alone, but with 2 imposing, athletic men by his side. He made a dramatic confession at the nearest police station, admitting to a grievous error. It was revealed that his relationship with the affluent businessman John Skinner had never materialized as planned. Whether this was a result of Scott's scheming or mere chance remained unclear. Nonetheless, for those who had closely followed the case, one thing was certain somewhere. There existed a wealthy heir who remained blissfully unaware of the concealed truth of his origins. The secret of Scott Reynolds' lineage might have remained concealed if not for the determined efforts of John Skinner, who, feeling the relentless advance of age, launched an extensive and meticulous search for his lost son. The scale of his search was both grand and meticulous, involving a thorough examination of orphanage archives and substantial investments in renovating educational institutions across the region. Skinner's aides funded the creation of state-of-the-art computer labs and modern gyms in these schools. Little did they know, their efforts indirectly brought significant improvements to the lives of countless orphans who had never imagined such luxury. After 6 months of relentless searching, the breakthrough finally came. With the aid of an international blood bank and donation center, a DNA match of nearly 100% was found. The revelation that Skinner's biological son was none other than Eric, an unassuming taxi driver with a law enforcement background, was nothing short of astonishing. Initially, skepticism was high. Many thought it was another case of mistaken identity, similar to the earlier confusion with Scott Reynolds. However, when Mr. Skinner managed to convince Eric to undergo a second DNA test, the results confirmed the truth. The evidence showed a staggering 99.9% probability that Eric was indeed his son. Eric's early years had been spent in an orphanage, where he had fought for every scrap of food, though the conditions were not as harsh as one might imagine. Despite this, the children never complained, finding solace in the stability of their shelter. Now, standing before his father, Eric saw a man who was his replica, albeit much younger. "Forgive me, son, for finding you so late, mister." Skinner's voice trembled with heartfelt regret. The joyous news of their impending wedding was met with enthusiasm as Mr. Skinner immediately began planning a grand celebration. The arrival of the new generation was also on the horizon, with Dorothy announcing her pregnancy, adding another layer of happiness to the unfolding family reunion. In the end, what had begun as a quest shrouded in mystery and misfortune culminated in a touching family reunion, transforming the lives of those involved and bringing a sense of fulfillment and new beginnings to the once unknown son of a wealthy businessman. Thank you so much for watching. We've journeyed through a compelling story of mystery, resilience, and unexpected discoveries. From the challenges faced by Dorothy in her quest to provide a better life for Nicholas, to Eric's astonishing revelation as a long-lost heir, and the ultimate family reunion, we've seen how perseverance and love can reshape lives. So, what have you learned from today's story? Reflecting on these powerful themes, think about how the determination of our characters to overcome obstacles and seek truth can inspire your own life. We'd love to hear from you. Please share one key takeaway from this video and how you plan to apply it in your life by commenting below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave your comment and show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Your engagement helps us bring more inspiring and impactful content to you. Thank you for being part of our journey.